Okay, so I would like to provide a brief commentary on the subject of Miss India Walton's recent defeat to Mr. Byron Brown for the elected mayor of Buffalo. So I've been kind of wanting to talk about this for some time, but I haven't had the time to do so, and I finally found the time, so here I am. So if you're not aware, I'll give you a brief overview of the situation, and then I'll get into it. So, India Walton is a woman that is a self-proclaimed socialist, and she ran against incumbent mayor of Buffalo, Mr. Byron Brown, not too long ago, earlier in this year, and she won the Democratic primary against him. And for those of you that aren't aware, those that usually win the Democratic primary for the mayor of Buffalo, at the very least, quite typically go on to become the mayor of Buffalo. But as you will see in this situation, there was a special case, and there are many factors at play that made this case as special as it was. So she won as a self-proclaimed socialist, and then they went to the general, and Mr. Byron Brown ran as a write-in candidate. And I'll tell you why that was so astonishing in just a second. But what I want to do in this video is talk about why India Walton lost the general election, which she did, what factors went into contribution of her losing, and how much of that was just her and her campaign and the corporate influence that Mr. Byron exhibited through his corporate donors and allies in the business community from both the Republicans and the Democratic establishment. So firstly, I want to start with Miss India Walton and her mistakes. And I must be honest, the research that I did, it wasn't insanely thorough, at least looking into the mistakes that she made, but I did find a couple that I would like to highlight. So, some unexamined context from Walton's campaign, as Mr. C.M. Lewis calls it. She lost the support of the only union that backed her in the primary, the Buffalo Teachers Federation, because she told business leaders she was pro-charter. That's extremely interesting. I don't know the ins and outs of why she did that. I don't know why she's pro-charter, but that did contribute to her own demise, and she did that herself. The next is the Western New York AFL-CIO, which had stayed mostly quiet about the race, went nuclear after her campaign sent out mailings from scab printers. In Buffalo, one of the most union-dense cities in the Northeast. Now, that's all I want to bring to you as it regards to her side of things. Now, I'm sure she made more mistakes that I'm simply not aware of, but that's pretty much all I'm going to give you. Now, let's jump into the other side of things, Mr. Byron Brown and his efforts. Now, before I get into this, I want to give you a quick idea of who this character is. Mr. Byron Brown has been the mayor of Buffalo for some time. Buffalo, as a result, has gotten worse. Poverty has gotten worse. He hasn't tackled the subject of inequality at all, if all that well. He's been, honestly, a failure to the people of Buffalo, and he's been catering to the business community. He's been cutting their taxes, giving them subsidies. What you'd really expect corporate corrupt politicians to do, whether they're a Democrat or Republican, and he just so happens to be a Democrat. Now, to make the case against him and his corporate backers, I have with me an article from Jacobin that I'm not going to read in its entirety, but use it as a sort of an aid to really explain this point. So he ran as a write-in candidate, as we discussed. But how did a write-in candidate beat somebody that previously won the Democratic primary? Well, as this Jacobin article points out, Mr. Byron really went in on India Walton's background. So India Walton is a person that became a mother as a teen. She comes from a working background. She was a working mother when she was a teen. She doesn't come from any kind of wealth whatsoever. She seemingly had a struggle growing up, as many Americans go through. And Mr. Walton, or Mr. Byron, Mr. Brown, capitalized on that. And he brought up mistakes that she made in her past. The mistakes consist of the following, and he exploited this, and you'll see why he did this. She was charged with $295 worth of food stamps fraud in 2003. She owed $749 in back taxes in 2004. She failed to show up for a court summons sent to the wrong address. She wrote a rude Facebook post, and her car was towed just last month over unpaid parking tickets. That's what he told the American people. That's what he told the people of Buffalo about Miss Walton, to demonize her, to make her seem like some sort of, dare I say, criminal. Well, it worked. As this Jacobin article points out, a week before Election Day, more than half of voters, I believe it was 53%, said that their opinion of Miss Walton had gotten worse since the primary. Wow. Wow. How amazing is that? How absolutely amazing. And if you're wondering how did he do that? How did he find the funds to promote these sort of things, to run these ads? How did he sway the thinking of the people of Buffalo so quickly and so on a dime to have them look at her in such a negative light so easily and so quickly? Well, we turn back to his corporate backers. His comeback was helped, as his Jacobin article points out, every step of the way by a business sector terrified that after 15 years getting tax cuts, subsidies, and taxpayer-funded grants, the gravy train was about to end. Listen here. Brown raised $851,000 in just 4 months from the city's moneyed interest. He was also helped by a bipartisan political establishment against Walton. New York Republicans and the Democratic establishment. As his Jacobin article points out, Walton got an endorsement from Senator Chuck Schumer, but it was late. But the Democrats largely stayed away from endorsing Walton. I actually made a video about this with the state party chair comparing her to white supremacist David Duke. I mean, it was absolutely amazing the way these corporate Democrats treated Miss India Walton simply because she's a self-proclaimed socialist. Lesson to all you socialists out there that may think about running in the future, or you have socialist ideas or left-wing ideas or social democratic ideas. The corporate Democrats, okay, the blue dogs, they will always fight you harder than any right-winger ever, because you are more of a threat to this system, okay, that hurts so many, but they love so much, than any right-wing demagogue will ever be. Okay? Now, I would like to continue. On the subject of voter turnout, 20% of Democrats showed up to vote in the Democratic primary where India won, or 13.8% of Buffalo's registered voters. That's an abysmal number of people coming out to vote. But she won. In the general election, 37.4% of registered voters showed up. So more than 3 times, I believe. I'm not the greatest at math, but I believe it's more than 3 times the amount of people turned out, or almost as much as 3 times the amount of people turned out in the general than the primary. And of course, as we know, Mr. Byron Jones won the general. So what was it that the increased turnout gave Mr. Byron Jones the advantage? Well, we just talked about the corporate backing, where they demonized her background, made her seem like a bad person and what have you, and over half of voters' opinions changed. Well, let's talk about whose votes he won, other than the business community, because I believe it was I think wealthy Republican or something like that. Some insanely wealthy people accounted for like 2/3 of Mr. Byron Brown's vote. But so the people whose vote that he won, the people that flocked to the polls, get ready now, wealthy white individuals in Buffalo. That's who he won. That's who Mr. Byron won. Who did Miss India Walton win over? People that were less wealthy. Minorities, black people, people like her. That's who she won. You see, it's this thing that the Democrats do and have been doing for quite some time now. They have the African American voters that are, largely loyal to Democrats. sadly, right? And, you know, they're long-serving, they're a familiar face, Mr. Byron Jones in this case, and in the previous national election, it was Mr. Joe Biden. So they vote for them because they know them to be a Democrat, and, you know, they voted for them in the past. And it's accompanied by a surge of more conservative, as this Jacobin article points out, well-off white voters desperate to stop a left-wing insurgent. And that's essentially what happened in this Buffalo race. Of course, Miss India Walton had her own mistakes and her own mess-ups that contributed to her own demise, but it's largely the part of corporate influence. And Mr. Byron Jones being such a, or Byron Brown, I'm sorry, being such a big ally to the business community, and them stepping in, right-wingers, left Democrats alike in the business establishment, stepping into his aid and helping him to defeat this left-wing, you know, abomination that they wanted to stop, because they knew that the tax cuts would end, the subsidies would end, and the overall nice treatment to these insanely wealthy people and corrupted people would end. But it didn't, unfortunately, because they fought back and they won, and they have endless amounts of money and influence and ways to defeat you. But I make this video to say that this is no referendum. You know, she won the Democratic primary. I believe she can win a general. Look, man, we know that left-wing candidates can win. They're in the Senate. They're in the House. They're there. People like AOC, Bernie Sanders, Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush, all the rest of them. We've seen it happen before. But it's incredibly difficult. If you look to Miss Nina Turner in her race over in, you know, that district in Ohio, she ended up losing to Shontel Brown. I made a video on that. I mean, Shontel Brown received so much corporate money at the last minute, so much corporate backing. Of course, Nina Turner, as did Miss India Walton in this case, make their own mistakes that led to their own demise. But when it comes to being an outsider, a left-wing candidate, when you're taking small dollar donations, when you're not backed by the wealthiest people in the country, it's an uphill battle. And that hill is very, very steep, and it's very difficult for you to win. But I think that it's important to realize that you can win. And hopefully she and her people are not discouraged. Unfortunately, the people of Buffalo will continue to suffer under the rule of a Mr. Byron Brown, as they have been for so many years. It's unfortunate, but as I talked about earlier, the propaganda worked. Miss India made her own mistakes, which is also unfortunate. But we can all learn from this, and hopefully the left can take this and try to figure out new ways on how to combat this corporate power and influence, and learn how to not make the mistakes that they make, such as supporting charter schools, getting unions to go against you, and all the rest of it. Those are needless mistakes that you honestly shouldn't be making, especially when the deck is stacked against you so high.